Chapter 14, Answering the New Age. Not quite the New Age as in the Baha'i thing being taken to a further extent with people like H.P. Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, but something else, right? From the New Year's session of the conference at Charleston to the New Century session of the General Conference was but a step. After the Charleston sitting had concluded its labors, Asbury dispatched his chaplain, Jesse Lee, on a visit to a number of the more western outposts to see that the itinerants were in their places, while he continued his rest in Charleston, if such a laborious day lay off as he was there taking could be called rest. Rumbly in the tumbly. Well, that's not in it, but Lee, having returned from his mission early in February, the two set out on their return northward, with Baltimore as a destination. The General Conference opened in Baltimore, and in the canonical first week in May, Bishop Asbury describes this conference as one that indulged in much talk and yet did little work. There was little that needed to be done, and surely it was a great comfort to him that the body kept its hands practically off the discipline. The church is perhaps happiest when the general body finds least to do. Certainly it is a salutary rule to avoid unnecessary legislation. Okay, that part's true. Like people questioning Moses until they got a really difficult job ahead of them. But several important matters engaged the attention of the conference. 2 full days were given a consideration of the double relations of Dr. Coke to Methodism. It will be remembered that a letter from the English conference had been brought by him to the Brethren in America in 1797, requesting that he be released from his promise to reside amongst them, since there was the most urgent need of his services in both England and Ireland. This letter had at first been read to the Virginia Conference, and while that body had no power to act upon it, consent was given so far as its rights were involved, and the whole matter was left to the General Conference. Asbury had written an official letter to the English brethren, explaining the situation, and so the request was now to be acted upon. The conference, not without reluctance and regret, for Coke had come to be better understood and more highly esteemed, consented to lend him for a time to the English brethren, with the understanding that he was to return and take up his residence in America so soon as his business would allow. It was also expressly stipulated that he should return for the General Conference of 1804. The next action of the conference was to solicit from Bishop Asbury an expression of his wishes as to the general superintendency. For some time previous to the meeting of the body, the bishop had seriously considered it, if he should not offer his resignation. This information he gave out freely to the preachers. He even went to the extent of writing his resignation, with a view to submitting it at the first session of the General Conference, but it seems that the opposition to that course was so great that he reconsidered it. He then submitted to know if the conference would be satisfied with such partial service as his shattered and enfeebled health would permit him to give. In answer to this inquiry. The conference, by unanimous vote, expressed its gratitude and great obligations to him for the many and great services he had rendered in the connection, and entreated him to continue in the general superintendency as far as his strength would permit. Both Asbury and the conference regarded this action as a practical superannuation. The man whom the brethren saw before them, though but 55 years of age, was broken, emaciated, and apparently near the grave. But the bow of the mighty man was only temporarily unstrung. He had yet before him more than 15 years of apostolic labors. He was yet to catch the step of the new age and lead the hosts to victories now barely dreamed of or wholly unimagined. The mind of Bishop Asbury being thus ascertained, the conference, by a decisive majority, voted to elect one additional bishop. This being settled, the question came up as to what should be his relation to the two original bishops. Should he be an assistant of Asbury, or should he be his equal? This afforded an opportunity for a renewal of the old fight to restrict the appointing power of the bishops, but after many amendments were offered and defeated, it was voted that the bishop should be elected. The bishop to be elected should have equal authority with Asbury. The Eckankar thing, the guy didn't give up all his titles, but the organization, the corporate board said, yep, Darwin Gross, we're voting you out of your position. You're, like supposedly the prophet, but the apostle, as we'd call it in this sense, which is, if it's a spiritually sanctioned title, like something apostolic, it doesn't work like that, but people wondered whether or not they were equal, even though the Mahanta was not part of that title. But that's something completely different. Responding to Eckankar, the New Age religion, would be where I talk about that. But following this action, the conference proceeded to the election as ordered. The expectation of Asbury was that Jesse Lee would be selected by an almost unanimous vote, and that appeared to be the most general forecast. But when the vote was counted, a tie was announced, Jesse Lee and Richard Watcote receiving each 57 votes. A second ballot was thereupon ordered, and the result was the election of Richard Watcote by a majority of 4 votes. The selection of Watcote has generally been regarded as a mistake, and plainly, the circumstances being considered, it is hard to be accounted for. He was 10 years older than Asbury, nearly as feeble, of an ascetic temperament, and proverbially impractical. He was, however, a blameless holy man, with an enticing and effective preacher, but instead of being wings or even crutches to Asbury, he was, in the blunt language of one of Asbury's biographers, a burden. As a sort of official chaplain to his colleagues, he visited the yearly conferences, presiding and preaching as there was necessity, while Asbury planned the stations and administered affairs in general. After only 6 years of service, the gentle-spirited man was called into rest. I guess I have to stop to save this from overheating.